Malcolm X was an American revolutionary.
An electrifying spokesman for the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X fought to attain civil rights through militant self-defense.
This will be an organization that will give the black man in this country the right to defend himself by any means necessary.
Born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, Malcolm grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, where he suffered the death of his father in 1931. Several years later, Malcolm's mother was placed in a mental institution, and he lived in foster homes until he dropped out of school at 15.
Malcolm X was a brilliant young man, but he told the teacher he wanted to be a lawyer, and that teacher suggested instead that he be a carpenter. That begins Malcolm X's sort of slow slide out of school.
After moving to Boston, Malcolm fell into a life of drugs and crime, and at 20 years old, he was sentenced to 10 years in jail for larceny. While imprisoned, Malcolm joined the Nation of Islam, and upon his release in 1952, he changed his name to Malcolm X.
Most people who are descendant from formerly enslaved Africans carry the last name of their former masters or those families, and Malcolm X basically let go of that name, and he chose X to symbolize his unknown African name.
From 1952 to 1960, Malcolm X expanded the Nation of Islam from roughly 400 to 40,000 members. But as an opposing voice to integration, Malcolm X incited fear and controversy.
Malcolm X was the counterpoint to Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. They were talking about nonviolence and peace and love and cooperation. Malcolm never participated in violence, but he was definitely about, we have to fight back. He spoke for so many African Americans who were literally terrified of saying the things that he was saying.
Anyone who stands in the way of your and my freedom, our human dignity, is a cold-blooded, blue-eyed enemy.
What Malcolm X did that drew so many people to him was he had an energy that was urgent and young. And I think he triggered a certain kind of action in people, a certain kind of self-esteem that I'm worthy of challenging the status quo.
In 1963, tensions erupted between Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam due to his growing popularity and his objection to the extramarital affairs of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam leader. By 1964, Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam and converted to Sunni Muslim.
Malcolm X had this life-changing event when he went to Mecca. He went outside of America and connected to the global image of Islam. He came back differently and felt that everyone was his brother.
On February 21, 1965, while preparing for a speech in a Manhattan ballroom, Malcolm X was rushed by 3 gunmen from the Nation of Islam and was killed by 21 shots to his body. His posthumous autobiography, published in 1965, was named by Time magazine as one of the 10 required nonfiction books of all time, and became a film in 1992 starring Denzel Washington.
Hello, my name is Lanisha DeBartolabin, and I am President and CEO of the Northwest African American Museum. It's my pleasure to welcome you virtually to our incredible program that will educate, inform, inspire, and uplift Black culture, leaders, Black history, and most importantly, Black futures. The Northwest African American Museum is a premier cultural institution in Seattle, Washington, and one of the most significant voices for the Black experience in the Pacific Northwest. Our mission is to spread knowledge, understanding, and enjoyment of the histories, arts, and cultures of people of African descent for the enrichment of all. The Northwest African American Museum is more than a museum. We serve as a source of community, connection, understanding, and empowerment. With each program, it is our hope that together we can join forces to advance justice and equity, cultivate educational empowerment, and center and celebrate Black history, arts, and culture. Through intentional dialogue as well as creating programs that deepen our understanding of our heritage, we believe that we can create a community that reflects the pioneering spirit of our ancestors. We welcome you to the NAAM. Enjoy the program.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Tiffany Latrice, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as NAAM's Marketing Director, and the honor to be your host for today's Malcolm X Day celebration. Malcolm X Day is an American holiday that is either celebrated on May 19th, which is Malcolm X's birthday, or the third Friday in May. And on this day, I have the pleasure of introducing Abdur-Rahman Muhammad, who is the esteemed historian of the Netflix documentary, Who Killed Malcolm X? Abdur-Rahman Muhammad is based in Washington, D.C. He is a historian, journalist, writer, and activist, widely regarded as one of the most respected authorities on the life and legacy of civil rights era Black leader Malcolm X. He was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1962 and received his education from the Howard University, one of the nation's most prestigious historically Black colleges. He earned his degree in philosophy, and at Howard, Muhammad would become first exposed to many social, political, and cultural movements for Black empowerment during the 1980s. Active during this period were All African People's Revolutionary Party, the King Holiday Movement, the Anti-Apartheid Movement in South Africa, and the one that would hold the most lasting impact on his life, the Black Islam movement. Inspired by the life and example of Malcolm X, Muhammad accepted Islam in 1986 and continued to work tirelessly as an activist and teacher. He attempted to emulate the career of the great Muslim leader by working to reform lives and make a positive contribution to the struggle of African American people in their quest for justice. Muhammad's most important scholarly contribution to date has been the explosive revelation he published in 2010, The Identity of William Bradley, aka Al-Mustafa Shabazz, the alleged shotgun assassin of Malcolm X, who reportedly fired the first shot and the deadliest shot that took the life of Malcolm X on February 21st, 1965. His face had never been seen in the historical record in the 45 subsequent years of the killing. But Muhammad's identification of Bradley was purported in all major news outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Newark Star-Ledger, and so many more. Muhammad is featured in the documentary entitled Who Killed Malcolm X that aired first on Fusion TV during the fall of 2019 and began streaming on Netflix in January 2020, which is currently being streamed to wide acclaim. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Abdur-Rahman Muhammad. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So happy to have you here. How you doing?
Hey, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Awesome. So I just gave a whole overview of your background, and I want to start at the beginning. You grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. Tell me about your childhood and what was it like, and were you exposed to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement?
Yes, well, I lived through the civil rights movement. I am that old. However, my earliest vague impressionistic recollections date back to the assassination of Dr. King. I have no memories of Malcolm X. I was just a toddler then, child. But I have more vivid memories of the school desegregation, especially the stories that we would see on the news of what was going on in Boston, which was quite violent, and very, very nasty. Even in Providence, you would have parents who would show up after school and assail the Black children who were bused to, across town to that school. And nigga go home, this is not your school, and all that kind of thing. So, I remember that, and I do remember the Black Power movement, but from television, from watching it on television, not so much engagement with it. There wasn't that much of it really in Providence, Rhode Island, to be quite honest with you.
I can only imagine. I had a similar upbringing coming from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I went to international boarding school with mostly white people, and I was the only Black student there. And to see myself and validate myself, my mom made it a real profound impact that I researched 365 days of Black history, that I knew where I came from, and that I carried that with me every single day when I was going into these spaces. And you had that same type of energy when you decided to land in Washington, D.C., to go to a historically Black university, the Howard University. What made you decide Howard, and what was it like?
Well, that goes back to my childhood in Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, one of the things you learn from Who Killed Malcolm X is I was assaulted by the police at 14 years old. And so, I was full of rage, full of anger. I was quite militant, even as as a teenager. And so I wanted to get out of this almost lily white state. You know what I mean? I mean, like back in those days, the only time you could really hear Black music was on Sunday afternoon on WBRU, Brown University.
Mm-hmm.
They had a show called the 360-degree Black Experience in Sound. So I think it came on 12 noon, and it might have gone off at 6 at night or whatever. But if you wanted to hear new Black music, that's the only venue you could hear it, right? So that's the world that I was coming from, and had this encounter with the police. It was quite traumatic. And I always remember that statement of Malcolm X. He said, "Stop talking about the South. Stop talking about the South. As long as you're south of the Canadian border, you're South." So the point he was making is, we associate racism with Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, right? He said, but as long as you're south of the Mason-Dixon line, in other words, as long as you're in the United States, you're South.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was South-North, right? So I wanted to go down to the Chocolate City. Now, I didn't know, really, I didn't know, about Howard University. What happened was I had a guidance counselor who saw something in me, and she enrolled me in this program called Close Up. And Close Up is the program that takes high school students to the nation's capital so that they can learn about government, civic engagement. They meet politicians and media people and policymakers and so on and so forth. And so I went on this trip. 400 kids from the state of Rhode Island. 8 of us were minority. 8 of us out of 400 kids. So the bus was going down Georgia Avenue, right past Howard University. And, I guess the tour guide said, ladies and gentlemen, we're now passing Howard University, the nation's preeminent Black college and university, in this country. And I had never heard of that. I never heard of a Black college or a Black university. I had I had no college background. There was no college in my family. I was the first one in my family to go to college, oldest of 6. So I had never heard of these things. Black college, what is that? So I turned. I said, let me ask you a question. What does that mean? Black college, Black university. Does that mean everybody that goes there is Black? Is that what that means? Is that what it means? And the person said, well, maybe not everybody. Yeah, but basically, everybody there's Black. And I said, well, that's where I want to go.
Yes.
I want to go there. And that's how it was. I applied, and then I actually, I saved up my little McDonald's money because I worked and I came back down to Washington, D.C. I stayed with a cousin of mine in Oxon Hill, Maryland, and I kept berating and cajoling the admissions officer. You gotta let me in. You gotta let me in. Then I went back to Providence. I was writing letters. I don't know if I begged myself in. I don't know. But I got in.
You
And
got in.
one of the happiest days of my life is when I received that letter from the admissions office that you had been accepted to Howard University, my alma mater, that I love very, very much.
Oh, I love that. Congratulations. That must have been a feat.
Beautiful.
Oh, and just so affirming. And then you majored in philosophy. So tell us a little bit why you majored in philosophy at Howard, and what questions were you trying to answer?
Well, the truth is, people say, well, you're smart. You should be a lawyer. Look, the truth of the matter is, I didn't know what a college degree was supposed to do for you.
Right.
I had, I didn't really get a lot of guidance in this area, and I didn't even really seek any out really, So I was there in the milieu. I was there in the scene. You know what I mean? I was in the movement. You feel me? Like I wanted to go where the action was. You know what I'm saying? Like that cat in Spike Lee's movie School Days. You know what I mean? I was militant. Super black. And lack discipline and stuff like that. But why philosophy? Well, like I said, I thought I'd be a lawyer, and then I changed my major in engineering, and then I started having a lot of spiritual questions and big questions, and so I went into philosophy. I didn't know what these degrees were supposed to do. I was just moving wherever my spirit was taking me. Now, the truth be told, I took just as many history credits as I did philosophy. So I really should have double majored. If I look back on it, I'm almost certain of that,
Right.
Or almost that. I should have double majored if I knew what I was doing. But
Absolutely.
I didn't, So, but philosophy and history, they go together.
They're totally
together. Yeah, they go together.
Totally in tandem, because you're seeking the truth. I think
exactly.
Historians are truth seekers, and
they're asking big questions.
Yes.
Right, and then you're learning the methodology.
Yes.
To gain answers to those questions. Exactly.
Absolutely. And so philosophy, you're asking yourself questions. You're militant. You're just in the middle of it, and it being in the middle of it, you were exposed to all of these incredible movements. And that one movement, the Black Islam movement, you said had a profound impact on you. Why?
Well, absolutely, because I had studied with all of these other movements, right?
Okay.
The All African People's Revolutionary Party, founded by Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, who also graduated from my department at Howard. He has a philosophy degree from Howard, from the Department of Philosophy, Liberal Arts. The Anti-Apartheid Movement.
Yes.
Keep in mind, this was a long time before Nelson Mandela was released from prison and apartheid was dismantled. We used to go down to the Warner Theater and protest the acts that had performed in Sun City and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the embassy is right there in D.C., so we used to protest that embassy. And all of these different currents and streams and what have you that I was moving in, but I wasn't finding the spiritual satisfaction and the answers that I was looking for, like questions like what happens to you when you die? How are we supposed to live our life? What's the purpose of life? What constitutes good and what constitutes bad? And things of that nature. So and of course, the influence of the great Malcolm X. And I mean, Malcolm said that Islam was the answer. And I believed him.
Wow. Well, so when you discovered the Black Islam movement, was this the first time you came aware of Malcolm X, or was there a previous moment in your life where Malcolm X?
I knew about him from high school.
Right.
Okay, because after I was attacked by the police, sometime later, a very good dear friend of mine, when we were in high school, he was playing Malcolm X on a tape recorder.
What?
In the boys' restroom. That's the first time I heard Malcolm X. And this was not long after I had been attacked by the police. In other words, I was already, quite angry and infuriated, right? I was full of rage. And so when I walked into the restroom in high school, I may be in 10th grade, and I stopped. I froze. Who is that? You know what I mean? Who is that? That's Malcolm X.
Yes.
And my mind went back to the man with the glasses, you know what I mean? The autobiography. Okay. Wow. That was it.
It locked you in there.
And you know what? I have that very good friend to this day, and we talk about that. Yeah, so you remember his name is Lewis Turner.
Lewis, thank you.
Lewis Turner, Chops. He's a very, very fine vocalist in the New England area.
Wow.
Yes, he's incredible vocalist. But back then he was, considered a troublemaker because he wasn't taking it either. You know what I mean? And he's the one that kind of raised my consciousness.
Right.
Yeah, he raised my consciousness. So I credit Lewis with that. And so when I walked in that men's room,
yes,
he was playing, it might have been Message to the Grassroots or the ballad, but Malcolm was spitting fire. And I froze, and I was like, who is that? I said, wow. So no, in answer to your question, when I came to Howard, I of course knew who Malcolm X was, right. But I was still young and trying to find my way. Yeah, I was undisciplined. You know what I mean? He was there. He was always there, looming. But little did I know that he would play such a large role in my life.
Wow. And I think that seed that Lewis planted then, sparked this activism, this rebellion, this militant approach that you had in seeking out just Black experiences, Black culture, and why you decided to go to Howard. And then you deepen that with scholarly research by committing to a degree in philosophy and asking some really big, lofty questions that you didn't have the answer to. Correct. And so as I read your bio, you coined the term activist scholar. So how do you define an activist scholar? And what is the role of an activist scholar?
Well, I don't know if I coined it or not.
I'm going to say you coined it.
Okay. Maybe I did. I don't know.
I don't know.
But the truth is, this is a long tradition.
Yes.
In our community. Because, for so many decades and really up until, affirmative action and that era where Blacks in any kind of numbers could get tenured professorships or tenured teaching positions at universities and colleges, you had the independent activist scholar who, on the one hand, is either a leader or a worker in a grassroots type movement, all right, and is working to be a change agent to affect some type of positive change in his community or in the nation, right? But remains tethered to scholarship, research, writing, the creation, development, and curation of new knowledge. You know what I mean? That will push the work forward. So they go hand in hand, and the insights and the knowledge and the gems that you derive from the movement, from your activism, okay, it finds its way into the work that you're doing on a scholarly level.
Incredible. And who do you think who are the most prominent activist scholars?
Oh, there's a long line. Like, for example, I drew inspiration from so many people. We could talk about Hubert Harrison, the New York intellectual, going all the way back to the 20s. We could talk about J.A. Rogers, Sex and Race, and so many great men of color. We could talk about John Henry Clark. We could talk about Arthur Schomburg for whom the Schomburg Institute is named after. Okay, none of these gentlemen that I'm naming, until maybe some of them later in life, ever had a college education or formal education or taught on the university level until much later in their career. They were community activists and scholars who taught the people, maybe in the YMCA, you know what I mean, whatever kind of lyceum or public forum, okay, that they could secure with whatever meager resources that they had, right? And the public library was their research institute. We could talk about the great Harold Cruse, who authored The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, a book that exploded on the scene in 1967 and helped to create the Black arts movement. Harold Cruse was 50 years old when that book appeared. Before that time, he was an activist in Harlem. He was writing for little obscure journals and what have you. He had a little tiny rat race apartment in Harlem, and he was banging out on his typewriter. And you know what he was doing? You know how he was making his living? He was working in Macy's.
What?
He
No.
was working in Macy's. Yep. And when the book hit, bam, it essentially served as his PhD thesis, because that book became, an acclaimed tome in the Black arts movement and Black liberation and the raising of Black consciousness. And it was so bad that the brother was appointed professor of history, Black history, at the University of Ann Arbor in Michigan, and he died and he retired there with tenure. Here's a brother who didn't even have a college degree. 50 years old. And I spoke to Harold Cruse toward the end of his life, because I was on my grind, selling cars or doing whatever I had to do. See, so when you see the series, you really are seeing, a brother from the community who was just trying to do good, trying to make things better for our people, who didn't have a cushy, comfortable, tenured position job. All of my research came out of my pocket. It came out of came out of my family. So,
y'all, this is a man that has spent decades and decades of time, energy, talent, resources to discover and answer questions about Malcolm X that we wouldn't know to this day if this man right in front of us was not here with us today. So thank you for your commitment and your research. And, I want to end with, what compelled you to stay committed so long, and what questions were you trying to answer?
We've known a lot for a long time, right? Like, it wasn't a straight line in the research. You know what I mean? It would move forward and then it would slow down. There'd be new leads or new facts that were learned, and then we'd piece things together, and then it would slow down, right? That's how it moved along, and life moves along. Okay, I mean, you have your setbacks and your challenges, you have children, and so on and so forth, right? But what kept me going was the fact that it became clear to me that this issue was frozen in the history books. Before I started publishing in 2010, the last book to appear on the assassination of Malcolm X was 1993. There had been no new developments, no new revelations since 1993. And then I began to work with Dr. Manning Marable in his book, Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, and I shared with him my research on these assassins and who they were, William X. Bradley and what have you, okay? But I published them before that book appeared, but it went on to help that book receive a Pulitzer Prize. That's what led the marketing campaign for that book, as those revelations about the assassins of Malcolm. So it was the realization that documents alone were
Mm.
not going to solve this case. You know, notice in the series when I was interviewing one of the brothers, he said the assassination of Malcolm X, it's in the history books. Leave it there. Okay.
Wow.
That was the general attitude. Like, this is too hot. It's not going to bring Malcolm back. Why are you trying to rip the scab off of that wound? Right? This is going to set off a war between the Muslims and the nationalists. You know, just leave it be. Just leave it be. And I wouldn't settle for that. I'm the kind of person, if you tell me don't do it, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's the kind of person I am. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Because the historical significance
Mm.
was too great. And I felt that we owed a responsibility to Brother Malcolm and to Sister Betty and to his daughters and to their posterity to find out definitively what happened, and also to clear those two innocent brothers who served over 20 years of their life for a crime they didn't commit, and that the Muslim community in Newark, New Jersey knew they did not commit.
Ooh.
Knew they did not commit. So I felt as a Muslim, this was a stain on our community. So being in the Muslim community and having access to very, very sensitive information, that I could crack it. And I had felt the responsibility to do so. And I did receive some backlash from certain quarters for doing that. But it was the right thing to do.
Wow. Thank you.
The only photograph I haven't published now is Leon Davis, which I will be publishing soon. But yeah, so and then the issue essentially was a dead letter. It was frozen. It was frozen solid in the history books until around 2010, when I started publishing my findings, and when I began to share them with Columbia historian Dr. Manning Marable, who included it in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Malcolm X: A Life of Reinvention. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, were you nervous to publish it?
Yes, I was.
Did you receive threats on your life? I mean, what was that like?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
I need to make it known. But yes, chart that journey too. Like, what urged you and what urged you to stay committed to it and seeing it all the way through? Even though there probably were naysayers kind of chiming in your background, like, how does he know? You know, how is
well, like I said, I'm very committed to what I do, you know, and I think that's my makeup. That's how I'm built. I'm a hard driver, and it became clear to me that if I didn't do it, it simply was not going to be done. Like I said, no one was even talking about it. You know what I mean? The last book to come out on the assassination of Malcolm X that I didn't work on and that I'm not featured in, like Manning Marable's book came out in 2011. The next book before that was like 1993.
Wow.
Okay. So there was no new anything coming out. And for all practical purposes, it was forgotten about. Like you see one of the brothers in the series, he said, the assassination of Malcolm, it's in the history books. Leave it there. Right? That was generally the attitude of everyone. You know? So this thing was not going to be broken by documents alone. You had to have a connection to the Muslim community. You had to be a member of the community to get the kind of insights and leads and gems to help piece it together and ask the right questions. And once I knew how to ask the right questions, then I knew who would be the right kind of people to pose them to. you know, and then one day I got the answer that I was looking for, you know, and it almost knocked. I mean, I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep. I got it all. I got it all. You know, at one function, I approached the brother and I said, hey, you know, to tell you the truth, it was kind of like a throwaway comment because, you know, this is a very sensitive issue, but people don't like talking about it. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room amongst the Muslims. And I asked the question, I said, yeah, you know, the man that killed Malcolm, I know this about him. I know, but, oh yeah, William X. Bradley, Al-Mustafa Shabazz, married to such and such and so and so. Here's where he works. Blah, 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 blah. He gave it. I was like, my head was like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, that's how it happened.
Wow.
That's how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. And you know, once, and one thing that I realized, though I understood, is that information travels a certain kind of way in the Muslim community. People just don't say things like that unless it's fact. You know, like that's not something you're just going to let come off your lips unless it's absolutely true. I had no doubt about it that it was true because I already had done the research. I already knew certain facts about his life, and he was just confirming, but he just put the, you know, he just put the meat on the bone. And it was astonishing.
Wow. And how do you think that this research really helped aid in amplifying and reimagining Malcolm X's story and life impact? I mean, this clearly led to a Netflix premiere and Fusion TV. So, I mean, clearly this research and this impact had a lasting impact and is still making his story very relevant to this day.
Well, you know, if you look at it, who killed Malcolm X was largely responsible for the revival that we're seeing in the life and legacy of Brother Malcolm. This past couple of years, you've had what? The Godfather of Harlem.
Yeah.
Right? Who Killed Malcolm X? You had the documentary Blood Brothers.
Yes.
Right? And then you had the PBS special on Muhammad Ali, which of course features Malcolm prominently in that relationship. You have a new biography that just came out by the late journalist Les Payne and his daughter Tamara Payne, The Dead Are Rising, on the life of Malcolm X. That also won the Pulitzer Prize. So anything with Malcolm right now turns to gold. One Night in Miami.
Oh, yes, that.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's, you know, his star is just rising higher and higher. And I'd like to think that we had a large role to play in reviving the memory and the legacy and the work of that great Black leader, Malcolm X.
Absolutely. And I honestly think the role of activist scholars and institutions like NAAM and other Black museums is to empower the youth to also carry on that legacy and to challenge historical facts and reimagine and revise things where it holds more truth, right? And so what would your advice be to our youth who are looking to answer questions and become historians and evaluate moments in history? Where do they start? Where do you encourage them to start?
They have to start first with the living contemporaries, the primary sources. Try to identify who is still alive, right, that witnessed the history firsthand. Who is there? Try to identify those people. You have to immerse yourself in the literature. You have to study everything about your subject. You have to determine that no one is going to know more about my subject than me, which means you have to get into the books and you have to spend many, many hours. It's lonely, it's painstaking. Um, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding. I had to wait many, many decades to see the fruition of my work, and I'm thankful to have lived long enough to see it. But whether you live long enough to see it or not, you still have to be true to yourself and put the work in. So you start with who is still alive. You start with the existing literature, and then you read the secondary literature, and then you do the work of history. That's pretty much how it's done.
Beautiful. And being able to go to an illustrious historical Black college and university and be around so many scholars and activists, what do you think the role is of HBCUs in preserving and documenting Black history and culture in this moment?
Well, I see that as their role. They're the repository of the knowledge. So they have to protect the knowledge, which means you need to have archives, and they have to be funded and maintained. You need to have trained and skilled archivists who can catalog it and preserve it, and as protect it for posterity. We really, the two more preeminent institutions that we have, the Moreland Spingard Research Center, which is at Howard University, and the Schomburg, which of course is there in New York. But all around the nation, we have lesser lights that are doing good work in preserving our history and our legacy. And I would say that we have to be protective of our own life. Like when we die, we have to put it in our will that I want my papers preserved. I want them deposited at this library, at this institution. A lot of our history is being lost because it's being thrown out in the dumpster when granddaddy or grandma dies. I remember one of my neighbors showing me the actual typewriter of Dr. Anna Julia Cooper, the fourth African-American woman to earn a PhD. She lived to be about 104 years old. She was, just a powerhouse intellectual on the level of Dr. Du Bois and Kelly Miller and all of that generation, the only female founder of the American Negro Academy, which predated the founding of the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History by Carter G. Woodson. Here's a woman who, earned her PhD in French at the Sorbonne at the age of 66 years old. All right. And anyone who studies that era will know Dr. Anna Julia Cooper is a big name. Here's a neighbor of mine showing me her typewriter. Somebody else in the neighborhood got her desk because when she passed away, her nieces and nephews, because she didn't have any children herself, they inherited the house. And then, like some of the stuff ended up in the dumpster. Some of it was given away. It's crazy. So this is what happens, if we don't put in our will that we want our legacy, our papers, our writings, our artifacts to go to these institutions so that some historian later will be able to reconstruct our life and tell our story.
Wow. That's beautiful. Do you have a personal archive? Are you documenting and archiving your life as you live it?
Man, I keep everything.
I was like, I hope you do.
I keep everything, man. I keep everything. And, God help the historian who tries to reconstruct my life. Yeah,
someone's gonna find it and gonna be like, man, I cannot wait to write his biography. Are you gonna write a biography, or you think you'll do an autobiography at all?
A lot of people ask me to, and I am kind of retweaking the book that I'm writing now about the assassination to integrate some more biographical material about myself because many people want to know, the same thing you're asking me. What kept you going all these years?
Right.
Why were you so tenacious? Why didn't you let it go? What was driving you, man? What's going on with this guy? And so I wanted to talk about my struggles and my my ups and my downs. So
Mhm.
many people have told me that they've been inspired by my story because they were working on the story of their family or the history of this institution or whatever, but they don't have an advanced degree or maybe even any college education or what have you. You don't need it. This is the information age. Okay, if you know how to use the internet, you know how to pull things up. You can be a great researcher and make a great contribution to the history and the legacy of our people.
Mm.
All you have to do is want it and to do it, and you don't need validation from anyone. And that's what Harold Cruz told me. You don't need validation from anyone. Just go in there and get it done. Do what you want to do.
That's beautiful. And as we celebrate Malcolm X Day, how do you want people to celebrate Malcolm X? How should Malcolm X be celebrated? And yeah, I just kind of really want to know that.
Well, he should be celebrated the way we've always celebrated him, the
Okay.
way we're doing right now, to come together and remember his contribution. Remember that he wasn't a perfect man, and no man or woman is.
Mm.
But his impact has been tremendous. And the best thing that we can do to remember him is what we're doing right now. Set time aside, whether it's his birthday or the day of his assassination, February 21st. Mark these moments, put time aside to study his life, read the biographies, watch the footage of him. Thank God there's so much footage of him available now. It's almost like he's still with us,
Mm.
right? So I would say that's the best way to do it, I think. Just to commemorate.
Abdur-Rahman, thank you so much. If you can leave us just one of your favorite Malcolm X quotes to close this out.
One of my favorite ones. I'm nonviolent with those who are nonviolent with us, but I'm not nonviolent with those who are violent with us.
Mm.
Let's remember that in the wake of this massacre in Buffalo. If
Yeah.
you want to seize upon any of Malcolm's teachings, the one he went to his grave with is armed self-defense. He never took that off the table. And man, I tell you, I just wonder how different things would have been
Mm-hmm.
if that Black community, if someone in that supermarket, other than the security officer who fought a valiant fight to take down that killer. But if we were allowed to arm ourselves and learn how to protect ourselves, how much different that scenario would have been.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. And it's an honor to have you here. I'm going to close this out, but thank you so, so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
On behalf of the Northwest African American Museum, we hope you feel empowered, inspired by the life and legacy of Malcolm X. May you go forward today with research, with questions, and seek those answers to further evolve Black liberation for all across America. Malcolm X led with honesty, sincerity, and integrity. What a joy and an honor to hear from Abdur-Rahman Muhammad, this evening. Wishing you all a glorious evening. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.